It was supposed to be a peaceful day, a day of mourning, remembrance, and quiet reflection. But for the family and friends of one beloved soul, it turned into a scene of chaos and disbelief. Imagine walking into a church, expecting to find solace, only to be met with the raucous laughter of a group of teenagers. You'd expect them to be outside, somewhere else, far from the solemnity of a funeral. Yet there they were, standing in the back, loud, laughing, and completely out of place. Can you even begin to understand the frustration, the anger, the disbelief of the widow standing at the front, her heart already shattered by the loss of the love of her life? What would you do if you were her? What if you were in the shoes of those teens, having no clue how your actions were affecting someone in the most vulnerable moment of their life? I know, right now, you're probably asking yourself, how could anyone be so disrespectful? And that's exactly the question everyone was asking at that moment. You're about to witness something that might just change the way you see the power of forgiveness, the strength of a grieving heart, and the way we all handle those unexpected moments of cruelty in life. But trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. You're not just going to hear a story, you're going to experience it, and you're going to feel it deep inside. I promise you, you'll be on the edge of your seat, trying to figure out what comes next. Now, picture this. The widow, standing there with tears in her eyes, clutching a small photo of her late husband, probably overwhelmed with grief. And in the midst of her sorrow, these teenagers, are joking, laughing, and showing no regard for the sacredness of the moment. It's the kind of situation that would make anyone want to scream. But not her. Not the widow. In fact, she does something that none of us could have predicted, and this is where things get wild. Something so unexpected, so powerful, that it stops the teens in their tracks and forces everyone in that room to rethink their assumptions about respect, boundaries, and, most importantly, human dignity. But here's where the story gets even more complicated. The widow didn't just stand there in silence, taking the disrespect. No, she made a move, a masterstroke that not only shocked those loud teens but everyone who witnessed it. What she did next? Well, that's what you're about to discover, and trust me, it'll have you questioning what you thought you knew about strength and resilience in the face of adversity. This isn't just a story about a funeral, and it's not just a story about disrespectful teenagers. It's a story about humanity, about how we handle pain, how we confront disrespect, and most importantly, how we rise above when we're knocked down by life's harshest moments. It's the kind of story that reminds us that, even in our lowest moments, we can still find a way to rise, stronger, bolder, and more capable than we ever imagined. So stick with me, because you won't want to miss the incredible twist that's coming up. Are you ready to find out how this unfolds? To understand why the widow's response was more than just a reaction, it was a moment of pure power, something that nobody could have expected in a million years. You're about to find out, and trust me, this isn't the kind of story you're going to forget. You won't be able to look at funerals, respect, or even your own responses to life's challenges the same way again. So, take a deep breath, hold on tight, and keep watching. You're about to witness something truly unforgettable. What happened next will leave you with one burning question. How would you have handled it? Stick around, because the answer is just a moment away, and it's going to leave you stunned. The funeral had been planned for weeks, every detail meticulously organized. The widow, Eleanor, had been married to Henry for over 35 years, and in that time, they built a life together that was the envy of their community. They were the couple everyone admired, quiet, humble, and always there for others. Henry had been the kind of man who gave selflessly, whether it was offering a helping hand to a neighbor or volunteering at the local shelter. He wasn't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but he had a wealth of generosity that filled the hearts of everyone who knew him. Eleanor, his high school sweetheart, stood beside him through thick and thin, raising their 2 children and watching their grandchildren grow. Their life was peaceful, predictable, and full of love, until that one fateful night when Henry, after a brief illness, passed away unexpectedly. The death left Eleanor shattered, unsure how to continue without him. But she did what she always did, she carried on. The community rallied around her, offering support, organizing the funeral, and making sure she wasn't alone. The church was filled with people who had known Henry, people who had felt his kindness and his spirit. But Eleanor knew something the rest of them didn't. She knew Henry's death wasn't just an unfortunate accident. There was something about the way it happened, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but it gnawed at her. She'd spent days replaying his last moments in her mind, questioning the small details that didn't add up. She trusted the doctors, of course, but there was a nagging feeling that there was more to Henry's passing than just bad luck. Perhaps it was that feeling of unease, that lingering doubt, that kept her from fully letting go. The funeral was supposed to be her way of closing that chapter, of saying goodbye and letting the healing begin. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the thought that something was still unresolved. Eleanor had been preparing herself for a quiet day of mourning, surrounded by people who understood her grief, when the unexpected happened. The teens. It was just a normal, sunny afternoon, the kind of day you wouldn't think could be spoiled by the sound of careless laughter and loud conversation. They arrived in a pack, all dressed in dark clothes, as though they were there for something important. But their behavior told a different story. They stood at the back of the church, talking and laughing, making crude jokes as if they were at a party. And that's when it started. At first, Eleanor tried to ignore it. She thought, maybe they'd quiet down once the service began. But as the minutes passed, their volume only seemed to rise. Some of the other mourners glanced around, uncomfortable, but said nothing. Eleanor's grip tightened on the photo of Henry she was holding. It was the last piece of him she had left to hold on to, and here these strangers were, shattering the sanctity of the moment she needed the most. Why did they think it was okay to behave this way? Were they even aware of the grief in the room, the pain that was suffocating her? Or was it something else entirely? There was something about them, about the way they carried themselves. They weren't just teens. They seemed out of place.
Was there more to them than met the eye?
Eleanor couldn't help but wonder. Maybe she was just being paranoid, but something in the way they looked at her, something in their smirks, felt off. As she glanced toward the group, she noticed the lead teen, a tall, dark-haired boy with a cocky smile, staring directly at her. Was he mocking her? Did he know who she was? And then there was the girl next to him, her face partially obscured by a hoodie, her eyes glinting with something hard, something that unsettled Eleanor to her core. She tried to focus on the service, tried to listen to the eulogies, but the sound of their laughter kept creeping into her thoughts. She couldn't escape it. It was like they were doing this on purpose, trying to draw attention to themselves, as though they had some agenda. But what could it be? What would possess them to behave like this at a funeral? It was strange, almost unnatural. And that's when Eleanor's mind started to race. Could they have known something about Henry? Something about the circumstances of his death? Were they connected to his passing in some way? The thought made her heart race, and she felt a cold sweat prick at her skin. She knew she had to do something. She had to act, but she couldn't quite figure out how. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. Her mind was spinning with questions that she couldn't answer yet. And as if on cue, the loud teen in the back shouted out something so inappropriate that it cut through the stillness of the church like a knife. It was as if he was daring anyone to stop him. Eleanor's body tensed. This wasn't just disrespectful anymore. It felt like an intentional provocation, and that was when it hit her. This wasn't random. They weren't just there to cause chaos. They had a purpose. As her mind raced, Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know how she knew, but she was certain now. The teens weren't just a nuisance, they were part of something bigger. And they were there for a reason. But what was it? What was the connection between these loud, disruptive teens and her husband's death? Was it a coincidence, or was something darker at play? The room seemed to freeze, the noise of the teens fading into the background as Eleanor's thoughts spiraled. She felt a sense of dread creeping over her, but also something else, something unexpected. She wasn't going to just sit there and take it. She was going to find out the truth. And what she did next would send shockwaves through the entire room, leaving everyone, yes, including those teens, staring in stunned silence. What happened next, though, will leave you on the edge of your seat, desperate to know how it all unfolds. Was Eleanor truly just a widow at a funeral, or was she about to uncover something far darker than she could ever have imagined? Stick with me, and let's find out together. Because the truth is, nothing is what it seems, and what happens next will change everything. Eleanor's mind raced as the moments passed in that chaotic church, the heavy air of confusion settling around her like a storm cloud that she couldn't escape. She knew she had to get to the bottom of what was happening. The teens weren't just random troublemakers. There was something deliberate in their actions, something ominous she couldn't quite put her finger on. But as her instinct screamed at her to dig deeper, a quiet but persistent voice in her head reminded her that this wasn't just a simple situation. It was complicated, and any misstep could cost her dearly. It was one thing to suspect foul play, but another to dive headfirst into a mystery that could turn deadly. But where could she begin? It wasn't like she could just march up to those teens and demand answers. They had already shown their disregard for her grief. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she truly knew about the people around her, the people who were supposed to be her support system. Sure, she had friends in the community, and yes, the funeral arrangements were made with help from well-meaning neighbors, but no one could have prepared her for what she was about to uncover. As Eleanor made her way home later that evening, still shaking from the events of the day, she found herself staring at Henry's old study, the room where he spent so many quiet hours writing in his journals, researching topics that fascinated him, and keeping his most important files. She knew it wasn't much, but there had to be something, some clue, some piece of evidence that could explain why these teens had shown up at the funeral, why they had disrespected her husband's memory. The study door creaked as she entered, the air inside musty, the faint scent of old books lingering in the corners. She felt a strange mix of apprehension and determination as she scanned the room. Henry had always kept his papers organized, meticulous in a way she had admired. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something that could shed light on all this. But as she rifled through the drawers and folders, a sense of dread washed over her. There was nothing, at least, nothing that seemed out of place. She had hoped for a letter, a note, something, anything, that could help explain the mystery that was unfolding around her. But everything was just as it had been. The thought crossed her mind. Could it be that she was chasing shadows, letting grief cloud her judgment? Then, in the back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old receipts, she found it, a small, weathered envelope. Her heart skipped a beat as she carefully opened it, revealing a single piece of paper with a name scribbled hastily in pen. The name wasn't familiar, and that was exactly what troubled her. It was the name of a man who Henry had apparently known in his earlier years, long before they had met. Someone he had kept a distance from for a long time. Eleanor's hands shook as she studied the paper, trying to make sense of the connection. What was it about this name that felt so off? Why had Henry kept it hidden? And why was this the first time Eleanor had ever heard of him? Suddenly, the phone rang, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Eleanor jumped, the envelope slipping from her hands. She glanced at the caller ID. It was a local number she didn't recognize, but something about it felt urgent. Hesitating for only a moment, she answered. The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "You're getting too close," the voice said, sending a chill down her spine. "Stop looking. It's better for everyone if you just let this go." The line went dead before Eleanor could respond, the silence that followed suffocating. Her heart pounded in her chest. What did this mean? Who was that, and how did they know she was digging into Henry's past? Was this connected to the teens at the funeral? Was there someone out there who wanted her to stop asking questions? But the message was clear. Someone was watching her. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. And that only fueled her determination to find out what had really happened to Henry. She had to keep going, no matter what. But the obstacles didn't stop there. As the days passed, Eleanor began to notice strange things happening around her. Files she had left out on the kitchen counter were missing when she returned home. Books that had been opened were now closed. It was subtle at first, small details that could easily be overlooked. But soon, she realized someone was tampering with her search. The sense of paranoia grew. and the walls began to close in. Every time she reached out for help, every time she tried to confide in someone, she found herself met with blank stares or nervous laughter, as though they were afraid to speak. The more she asked, the more people seemed to back away. It was as though the whole town was part of some unspoken conspiracy, all turning their backs just when she needed them the most. But Eleanor's resolve only grew stronger. She was no longer just searching for answers about the teens at the funeral or Henry's death. Now, she was hunting for something much bigger, something that seemed to stretch far beyond the small, quiet town she called home. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there was one thing that was certain. Someone didn't want her to find out the truth, and that meant she was getting closer than ever before. Then, one evening, she received a package. No return address, just a plain, brown envelope. Inside, she found a photograph of Henry standing with the very same man whose name she had found in the envelope. The photo was old, grainy, but unmistakable. And the look in Henry's eyes, it wasn't the look of a man with a clear conscience. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as she turned the photo over. Written on the back in the same hurried handwriting was a single sentence: "He was never who you thought he was." Her mind reeled. What was going on? What had Henry gotten himself into all those years ago? And how did it tie into everything that had been happening recently? Was the man in the photo involved in Henry's death? Was he somehow connected to the teens who had disrupted the funeral? The truth was slipping through her fingers like sand, and every clue she uncovered only deepened the mystery. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. Eleanor was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a woman on a mission, facing forces she couldn't yet comprehend. And the more she uncovered, the more questions there were. But who could she trust? Everyone around her seemed to have something to hide. What if the answers she was searching for were more dangerous than she ever imagined? As she stared at the photo in her hands, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, she realized something even more terrifying. The deeper she dug, the more she began to suspect that the very people she'd once trusted might be hiding secrets that could destroy everything. And just when she thought she had the whole picture, something happened that threw everything into chaos. But that is a story for another time. Stick around, because the twist that's coming will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. As Eleanor stood there, holding the photograph of Henry and the mysterious man, the weight of the moment hit her like a freight train. She stared at the grainy image, trying to make sense of it. The note on the back of the photo echoed in her mind. He was never who you thought he was. But what did that really mean? Was Henry involved in something shady in his past that he had hidden from her all these years? Or had someone been using his name, manipulating his life from the shadows, all for some sinister purpose? She couldn't stop the flood of questions that swirled in her mind. She felt her stomach churn with a mixture of fear and determination. The pieces she had gathered seemed to form a murky picture, but the image was still incomplete. And just when she thought she might be able to make sense of it all, the world tilted beneath her feet. A few nights later, as Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, poring over Henry's old letters, trying to find some clue that might help her piece together the puzzle, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't the cryptic whisperer she had heard before. No, this voice was different, sharper, more urgent. "Eleanor, you need to stop," the voice said, the words practically crackling with tension. "You have no idea what you're getting into. People are watching you, and if you don't stop, it's not just you who will suffer." Eleanor's blood ran cold as the voice continued, but before she could speak, the line went dead. Panic surged through her, and her hands trembled. This wasn't a random threat. This was a warning. Someone was watching her closely, too closely, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard a knock on the door. Reluctantly, she opened it to find a familiar face standing on the porch: James, Henry's oldest friend. James had been there for years, part of their tight-knit circle, always present for family gatherings, always the one with a joke to lighten the mood. But something was different now. His face was pale, and there was a nervous energy in his movements that Eleanor had never seen before. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes darting around the room as though checking for unseen threats. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something," he stammered, his voice low and tense. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "I've been meaning to say this for a while, but it's too dangerous now. You've already started looking into things, and I can't sit back and watch you dig deeper without warning you." She listened intently, her pulse quickening.
What was he talking about?
What did he know that could change everything? "I don't know how much you know about Henry's past, but he was involved in something I was never supposed to know. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I've seen things, Eleanor, things that don't make sense." James hesitated, his eyes shifting as though he was struggling to find the right words. "There's a reason those kids showed up at the funeral. They're connected to the very thing Henry tried to leave behind, and whatever it is, it's big. It's dangerous. And it's not just about Henry anymore. You're in over your head." Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharp with the frustration that had been building for days. "What do you mean Henry was involved in something? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" James flinched, guilt written all over his face. "I didn't want to get you involved. It's not my place to say. Hell, I don't even understand it all myself, but there are people who don't want the truth getting out. They've got too much to lose. And if you keep pushing, it's not just you who'll be in danger." Eleanor's mind raced. There was so much more to Henry's past than she had ever known, and James, someone she trusted, had been keeping it from her. The anger in her chest mixed with a sense of betrayal, but her need for answers outweighed her feelings of hurt. She had to know what Henry had been hiding, no matter the cost. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't have all the details, but there's a man, someone who's been watching you, watching your every move. I don't know if he's the one who made the threats, but he's dangerous, Eleanor. He's been looking for you for a long time, and I think he's the one behind everything that's been happening." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Another player, another person pulling strings from the shadows. Was this the same person who had warned her to stop digging? The same one who was behind the cryptic phone calls? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. The danger was escalating, and she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Then, just as quickly as the conversation began, James' expression changed. His face went pale, and his eyes widened in fear. Eleanor followed his gaze to the window, where she saw a shadow move across the yard, just outside the door. Her pulse raced as she saw the figure standing in the darkness, watching her. She barely had time to react before James grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the window. "Get out of here," he hissed urgently. "You have to go now. They've found us." Before Eleanor could process what was happening, James pushed her toward the back door, urging her to run. Her mind was spinning, everything happening so fast that she couldn't keep up. But one thing was clear, she was no longer safe in her own home. Someone, maybe even several people, were determined to keep her from uncovering the truth, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure she never found out what really happened to Henry. Just as she stepped outside, the faint sound of tires screeching in the distance reached her ears. Someone was in a car, and they were driving straight toward her house. Eleanor's heart pounded as she turned to run, her thoughts clouded by fear and adrenaline. But as she glanced back over her shoulder, she saw a figure in the doorway of her house, James, standing motionless, his face pale, staring at her with a look of pure terror. And in that moment, Eleanor realized something that shook her to her core. James wasn't just afraid for her. He was afraid for himself.
But why?
What had he gotten himself into? And why did he look like he knew exactly who was coming for them? The twist, the unexpected revelation, would leave you on the edge of your seat, wondering how much deeper this mystery really went. The truth, Eleanor was beginning to understand, was darker and more twisted than she could have ever imagined. The more she learned, the less she knew. And now, the biggest question of all remained unanswered. Who could she trust, if anyone? Eleanor barely had time to process the situation before the unmistakable sound of an engine revving in the distance shattered the stillness of the night. Her breath caught in her throat as she darted around the side of the house, glancing back to see James standing at the door, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with panic. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, drawing closer with each passing second, and a wave of dread washed over Eleanor like a sudden, cold gust of wind. This wasn't just a random coincidence anymore. Whoever was coming for them was no longer playing games. They were closing in fast. She barely had time to think, only to act on pure instinct. Her legs moved before her mind could fully catch up, pushing her down the narrow path that led through the yard and into the thicket of trees at the back of the property. Her heart was hammering against her chest, each beat louder than the last, the sound drowning out everything else around her. The words James had said, "They've found us," echoed in her mind like a constant warning, a reminder that she wasn't just dealing with a few threatening phone calls anymore. She was being hunted. She tried to steady her breathing as she stumbled through the dense undergrowth, desperate to put as much distance between herself and the approaching vehicle. But her thoughts were a tangled mess. Why had James suddenly grown so terrified? Why had he been so quick to send her running? The questions gnawed at her as she pushed forward, her mind racing for answers that felt just out of reach. Was he involved in this somehow? Had he known more than he was letting on? Or was he genuinely trying to protect her from something far bigger and darker than she could comprehend? A rustling noise behind her snapped her back to reality, and she whipped her head around to see a shadowy figure sprinting through the trees, gaining on her. Panic surged, and her pulse quickened as she pushed herself harder, stumbling over the uneven ground. She couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford to slow down. Every instinct in her screamed that if she didn't keep running, she wouldn't make it out alive. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a fleeting moment, Eleanor considered ignoring it. But something compelled her to reach for it. The screen lit up, displaying a message from an unknown number. Her thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating before she opened it. Her hands were slick with sweat, her heart still racing in her chest, and she could hardly focus as her eyes scanned the words. "You're not going to make it out. Stop running, and we can make this easy. Keep digging, and it gets worse. Trust me." The message sent a jolt of ice through her veins, and a sickening realization hit her. Someone, or something, was always one step ahead of her. They knew where she was, what she was doing, and now they were toying with her. The world around her felt like it was closing in, the night air heavy with the weight of fear. She could hear the sound of footsteps drawing closer, and then, through the trees, she saw the car, a dark sedan, creeping through the edge of the forest, headlights cutting through the gloom. It was there, waiting, and her pulse pounded louder in her ears as she realized it was only a matter of time before it reached her. She sprinted faster, adrenaline pumping through her veins, her mind screaming at her to keep moving, keep running. Her breath was coming in short, ragged gasps now, and she could feel her legs beginning to give out from exhaustion. But the thought of being caught, of whatever waited for her if she stopped, pushed her forward. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her side, and she gasped, stumbling to her knees in the mud. She clutched her chest, trying to catch her breath, her vision blurring. The pain was almost unbearable, but it wasn't just physical. The terror, the weight of everything she had learned, and the relentless pursuit weighed heavier on her than anything her body could endure. Was this it? Was this how it was going to end? Just as the thought crossed her mind, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, her body frozen with fear as she realized she was not alone. The man standing before her was tall, dressed in black, his face hidden by the darkness of the night. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes, cold, emotionless, told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't here to ask questions or offer help. He was here to end it. The car's engine revved again, closer now, and the figure took a step toward her, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's instincts kicked in. She scrambled to her feet, pain shooting through her side, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. Her mind raced. What would Henry do? He had been the one always protecting her, keeping her safe, and now, all she had were her wits and a gut feeling that she could still make it out. But before she could make a move, the man's voice broke through the night, low and threatening. Stop running, Eleanor. You can't outrun the truth. Those words hit her like a punch to the gut. The truth. What was the truth? Was everything she'd been told a lie? Was this all part of some twisted game, a conspiracy she wasn't even prepared to understand? Her head spun as the man moved closer, and she had no choice but to act. But just as she turned to flee, the car finally emerged from the trees. The headlights blinded her, and she froze, paralyzed by the looming sense of doom. It wasn't just one person now, it was a whole operation. And she was the target. Just as the car screeched to a halt, Eleanor heard a voice, barely audible over the chaos, whisper from the shadows. "You don't know what you've started, Eleanor. But you're about to find out." And that was when everything went black. The last thing Eleanor heard before the world went dark was the faint sound of footsteps fading into the night. Was she safe? Or had she walked straight into the trap that had been waiting for her all along? As the blackness of unconsciousness began to loosen its grip on Eleanor, she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. The last thing she remembered was the screech of the car's tires and the sense of impending doom. Then nothing. Her head ached as she slowly regained consciousness, her mind sluggish, tangled in a fog of confusion and fear. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on the cold, hard ground, the damp earth beneath her seeping through her clothes. But something felt off, strangely off. The air was quieter now, less tense, as if the danger had somehow shifted. Her surroundings were unfamiliar. Gone were the trees and shadows she had been fleeing from. Instead, she found herself in what appeared to be an old, abandoned building, a warehouse of some sort. Her body ached, but there was a deeper ache, a gnawing sense of betrayal clawing at her. She tried to sit up, but her muscles felt heavy, almost as if they had been paralyzed by something more than just physical exhaustion. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, but the only thing she could see was the dim light filtering in through broken windows, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Then, a voice interrupted the silence, familiar, but utterly unexpected. "Eleanor, you're awake." Her heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the sound. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was Henry, her brother, the one person she had trusted above all others, the one she had believed was on her side throughout this entire nightmare. He was supposed to be the protector, the one who had always kept her safe from harm. But the sight of him now, standing in front of her with a calm, almost detached expression on his face, felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. He looked different, hardened, like he had become someone she didn't recognize. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. "Henry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's going on? Why am I here?" Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, the shadows casting an eerie glow over his face as he approached. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The sudden shift in the tone of their situation, the betrayal that hung in the air like a thick fog. He had been her rock. She had trusted him with everything. But now, she wasn't sure of anything. "You were never meant to find out," Henry said quietly, his voice carrying an unsettling calmness. "Not like this." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Find out what?" she asked, but already, the sickening realization was creeping in. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss, unsure of how far the fall would be. Henry's eyes softened for just a moment, a fleeting hint of regret flickering before being replaced by a steely resolve. "You're not the one who's been followed, Eleanor. Not by them, but by me, by us." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating, as if the weight of his confession was enough to crush her. "The messages you've been getting? The threats? They were from me, from the people I've been working with." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to process his words. "What?" "No. Henry, what are you talking about?" Henry took a step back, his gaze never leaving hers. He seemed to measure her reaction, waiting for something, maybe an understanding, or an acknowledgement. But Eleanor could only stare at him in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the revelation. He finally spoke again, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. All those clues you've been following, all those mysteries you've been uncovering, they weren't a mistake. They weren't random. They were meant to pull you in, to keep you distracted while we set everything into motion. While I set everything into motion. Eleanor's world felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. She wanted to scream, to run, to demand answers, but she was paralyzed, unsure whether she was hearing the truth or the twisted lies of someone who had just shattered her entire reality. You've been lying to me this whole time? You? She shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. The betrayal was too much. It felt like a knife in her chest, twisting with each word he said. Henry's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. I never wanted to lie to you. But the truth is far too dangerous. You wouldn't understand. You still don't, do you? Eleanor could feel the bile rising in her throat as she pushed herself up from the ground. Her legs wobbled, but she forced herself to stand, every muscle screaming in protest. She didn't care about the pain anymore. The pain of her body, of the bruises, the cuts. None of it mattered. Not compared to the pain of betrayal. What the hell is going on, Henry?
Who are you working with?
What have you gotten me into? Her voice cracked with the weight of the questions, the desperation seeping through. But Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he seemed to hesitate, a flicker of something like guilt, crossing his face for a brief moment. And then it was gone, replaced by the cold, unreadable mask he had perfected. I never wanted you involved, he said, his voice almost sad, but there's no turning back now. You've seen too much. And now you're part of something much bigger than you could have ever imagined. At that moment, the full gravity of the situation hit Eleanor. The people who had been chasing her, the messages, the threats, everything had been part of a larger plan. She wasn't just some innocent bystander caught in the middle of a mystery. She was the key. She had always been the key. And Henry, he had been orchestrating the entire thing. A sudden thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. The car. The one that had been chasing her. The man who had come out of the shadows. They weren't after her. They were after him. Her world tilted on its axis as the pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place, only to reveal a far more twisted and complex picture than she had ever anticipated. Everything she thought she knew about her brother, about her life, had all been a carefully constructed lie. And now, she had no idea who or what to trust. The question lingered in the air, more pressing than ever. Was her brother the hero, or had he been the villain all along? The silence between Eleanor and Henry stretched on, suffocating and oppressive. Her mind was reeling, trying to piece together the fragments of her life that had just been torn apart. Her heart raced, pumping a steady stream of panic through her veins. How could this be happening? How could someone she trusted so completely, someone who had always been her anchor, be capable of something so unthinkable? The weight of the situation was crushing her, but she couldn't look away from him, couldn't allow herself to. Henry's eyes were still locked on her, but now there was something else there, something dark, calculating. He wasn't the brother she'd known. He was a stranger. And in that moment, she realized just how much danger she was in. Her entire life had been a facade. Everything she had believed in, every relationship, every whisper of security had just been ripped away in one gut-wrenching revelation. There was no safety net anymore. There was no one she could turn to. Henry had made sure of that. You don't have to do this, Eleanor, Henry said, his voice almost pleading now, his eyes flickering with what looked like regret. But Eleanor knew better than to trust that look. You don't have to follow this path. It's dangerous. For both of us. I never wanted you to be part of this. I swear to you I didn't. His words were sharp, laced with an urgency that only added to the growing chaos inside her. She could feel the ground slipping out from under her, as if the foundation of everything she thought was real was being pulled away. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white as the reality of her situation slammed into her. What is this, Henry? What are you trying to protect me from?
Who are these people?
Who are you really? Her voice was trembling now, barely controlled. She was angry, angrier than she'd ever been, but there was a small part of her that was terrified, too. Henry's gaze hardened, and for a moment, it almost looked like he was going to say something more. But then he stepped back, his hands raised in surrender, as if trying to create distance between them. Eleanor, I'm trying to protect you from yourself. This isn't a game. It's not something you can just walk away from. They know everything about us. They're watching us. Her heart stopped. Who is watching us? Who the hell are they? The words fell from her lips, desperate and raw. But Henry didn't respond. Instead, he seemed to weigh his next words carefully. The silence stretched again, thick and suffocating, before he spoke in a low, serious tone. They gave me an ultimatum. You were never supposed to find out this way. But now that you have, there's no turning back. They want you, Eleanor. They want you involved, and if you keep digging, if you keep asking questions, they'll hurt you. They'll hurt everyone we care about. Eleanor's chest tightened. The weight of what he was saying was almost too much to bear. But she wasn't going to back down.
Not now.
Not when everything was on the line. She wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, control her life anymore. You want me to stop? To back off. Her voice was steady, but the fire inside her was building, burning brighter with every word. I'll never stop. I need to know the truth. And I need you to stop lying to me. For a moment, Henry's eyes flickered with what seemed like genuine emotion, desperation, fear, something that made her hesitate. But before she could register what was happening, he was standing right in front of her, blocking her path. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. You don't understand, Eleanor, he said, his voice low but firm. If you keep pushing, if you keep asking questions, it's not just about us anymore. It's about your safety. Your life. They will come for you. They will use you to get to me. You don't want that. Trust me. You don't. Eleanor's mind raced, the gravity of his words sinking in. The reality of the situation was dawning on her in a way it never had before. She had thought she was in control, that by seeking the truth, she would somehow regain her power, her sense of safety. But now, the very thing she was trying to uncover was threatening to consume her whole. She was on the edge of a precipice, and it felt like there was no safe way down. You're asking me to choose, aren't you? Eleanor's voice cracked as the weight of her emotions caught up with her. To choose between my safety and the truth. Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he seemed to study her, searching her face as if looking for something, a sign of weakness, perhaps, or a crack in her resolve. Then, finally, his voice was barely above a whisper.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm asking. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, her body trembling as she weighed the impossible choice before her. On one side, there was the truth, an unrelenting, burning need to understand what had happened, to unearth the lies, to figure out who was behind everything that had been happening to her. But on the other side, there was her safety, her life, and the possibility of everything she loved being destroyed in the process. The tension was suffocating. Eleanor felt trapped, her mind spinning, her heart torn between two paths, both of which seemed equally dangerous. There was no way to walk away unscathed. No way to come out of this without paying a price. Henry's voice cut through the silence again, his words like a sharp blade. You don't have much time. They won't wait forever. I'm giving you a choice, Eleanor. If you want to keep digging, if you want to keep searching for answers, then be ready to lose everything. Her breath hitched as she realized the full weight of what he was saying. The ultimatum wasn't just about her life. It was about everything she had ever known, everything she had ever loved. If she kept pushing, kept digging into the mystery, she might lose more than she could ever regain. But if she backed down, if she chose her safety, she would live with the gnawing uncertainty of what might have been. Either way, she couldn't escape the truth. It was going to haunt her, no matter which choice she made. Choose, Eleanor, Henry said again, his voice quiet but insistent. It's now or never. The choice seemed impossible. The stakes were higher than ever. And Eleanor knew, with sickening certainty, that whatever decision she made, there would be no turning back. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken words as Eleanor stood at the crossroads of her own fate. Her heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out everything else, the sound of her breath, the thudding pulse in her temples, the world outside of this suffocating moment. Henry's words echoed in her mind, but something had shifted. The pieces of the puzzle she had been trying to put together were falling into place, but now it wasn't just about her anymore. The conspiracy was bigger than she could have ever imagined. She had thought it was about her family, about her brother, and the people who had once been in her life. She thought the web she was tangled in was personal. But now, as she watched Henry, the cold dread in her chest spread like wildfire, consuming every rational thought. His eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were calculating. They had been all along. The realization hit her like a freight train. Henry wasn't just trying to protect her. He was trying to control her. And in the cold, unforgiving world she was now entering, control was everything. The truth was darker than she ever expected. The people Henry had warned her about, the ones who were watching them, they were far more dangerous than she could have anticipated. They were connected to something much larger, something more dangerous, something that reached into every corner of her life. Eleanor stepped back, her mind reeling as she processed the weight of it all. How had it come to this? She had trusted Henry. She had trusted all the people around her. But now, she realized that trust had been her greatest weakness. The pieces clicked together in her head like the snap of a lock, a betrayal, a lie, a dark connection she hadn't seen until now. The conspiracy was never about keeping her safe, it was about silencing her. And the deeper she dug, the more people she realized were in on it. She wasn't just a pawn in their game, she was the target. As the weight of the truth crashed down on her, her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Amanda. Her best friend. The one person who had always had her back. But something in her gut told her it wasn't a coincidence that Amanda was calling now, at the exact moment Eleanor was beginning to piece together the horrifying truth. She answered quickly, her voice shaky despite her best efforts to sound calm. Amanda? What's wrong? The voice on the other end was panicked, almost frantic. Eleanor, you need to get out of there.
Right now.
I don't have time to explain, but it's bad. They know. They know everything. They've been watching you, watching us. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her grip on the phone tightening as her mind spun. What do you mean, they know? She could feel the cold grip of panic tightening around her chest, suffocating her. I didn't want you to get involved, Ellie. But they've got to you, haven't they?
They've been watching you this whole time.
It wasn't just Henry. It's bigger. It's so much bigger. I never thought it would get to this point, but now. I'm sorry, I never wanted you to be part of this. Her world seemed to tilt on its axis, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words were spinning in her head, colliding into each other. Amanda, her closest friend, the one person she thought she could trust unconditionally, she was involved in this too? Eleanor's thoughts spun like a broken carousel, and before she could find any clarity, Amanda's voice came through again, shaking with fear. They'll come for you, Ellie. They'll come for everyone. And they won't stop until they've finished what they started. They know everything, and they won't hesitate to take anyone out who stands in their way. The line went dead. Eleanor stood there, the phone still clutched in her hand, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The truth hit her like a wall of bricks. Amanda wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't the innocent friend she had always believed her to be. Amanda had been part of this conspiracy all along, and now that Eleanor was in too deep, there was no escaping it. Her only hope had just vanished with a single phone call. Eleanor's pulse quickened as the world around her seemed to close in. It wasn't just Henry. It wasn't just the faceless group she had been chasing. The web she was tangled in was so vast, so insidious, that it had consumed everything in her life. There was no one she could trust, not even the people she loved. The door to the room creaked, and Eleanor whipped her head around, her heart slamming against her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Standing in the doorway was someone she didn't recognize, someone who looked too calm, too controlled for the situation. The stranger's eyes locked onto hers, cold and unfeeling. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as he stepped forward, a small, cruel smile curling at the edges of his lips. "I'm afraid, Ms. Monroe, that you've made a grave mistake." His voice was smooth, unnervingly calm. "But I'm here to help you fix it." His words should have been comforting, but Eleanor could sense the malice behind them. It wasn't an offer of salvation. It was a warning. She wasn't getting out of this.
Not now.
Not ever. The realization was like a slap in the face, the horrifying truth finally hitting her with full force. "You can't stop this," the man continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's no escaping what's coming. No matter what you do, it's already too late." Eleanor's blood ran cold as she realized the scale of what was happening. The conspiracy she had stumbled into wasn't just about her. It was about everything. It was about power, control, and a vast network of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And she was just one small piece in their game. A game that had already been set in motion, with her as the unwitting player. The question was no longer how to uncover the truth. It was whether she could survive long enough to make it out of this nightmare alive. Eleanor's heart was racing, her breaths coming in short, shallow gasps as she stepped into the dimly lit warehouse. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayals, the secrets, hung heavy in the air around her. She had come this far, pushed through the fear and uncertainty, but now, standing at the threshold of the truth, she felt the crushing weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Every step she took felt like it could be her last. Every corner she turned seemed to hold another danger, another lie. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't let them win. Not after everything that had happened. Not after what Amanda had said. The pieces had finally started to click together, and now there was no turning back. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of a single overhead light flickering in the corner. Her eyes darted around, every muscle in her body on high alert. She didn't know what she was expecting to find, but the tension in the air told her something was coming, something big. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her anymore. The conspiracy had always been more than that, more than what she could ever have imagined. Now it was real, and she was in the center of it all. Suddenly, a voice cut through the stillness. "I've been expecting you, Eleanor." She froze. It was Henry. He stepped out from the shadows, his face cold, unreadable. He looked different now, darker, more menacing, like the man she thought she knew had been replaced by someone else entirely. His presence filled the room, suffocating her, as if he were the very air she breathed. "You think you can stop this, don't you?" Henry's voice was laced with a venom she hadn't heard before. "But you can't. It's too late for that." It was always too late. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she took a step forward, her eyes locked on his, trying to read him, to find the man she had once trusted behind the cold exterior he was wearing now. "I don't understand. What is all of this?
Why?
Why did you do this?" A bitter laugh escaped Henry's lips. "You still don't get it, do you?" He shook his head. "It's never been about you, Eleanor. It was never about you. You were just the perfect pawn to move into place, just like everyone else." Eleanor's stomach dropped as his words hit her like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" she whispered, feeling a chill run down her spine. Henry stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "All of this, the lies, the secrecy, the manipulation, it's all about control.
Power.
And you're part of it now. Whether you like it or not, you're already too deep. You can't just walk away." Eleanor wanted to scream, wanted to push him away, but she couldn't move. She was frozen by the sheer magnitude of what he was saying. It was all a game to him. All of it, their friendship, the moments they'd shared, everything. She had been a piece on his chessboard, nothing more. But as Henry continued to speak, a flicker of doubt appeared in her mind. She had always known something was off, but this was beyond what she could have ever imagined. Was it true? Was this all just a game, with her as the unwitting player? Was everyone she trusted in on it, from Amanda to Henry himself? And then, just as the weight of Henry's words began to settle, something shifted. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, broke through the tension. A small click, a shifting in the shadows. Eleanor's instincts kicked in. She spun around just in time to see a figure emerge from the darkness, a man she didn't recognize, but whose presence was unmistakable. He was tall, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit the situation, his face hidden behind a mask of cold indifference. And in his hand, he held a folder, one that looked far too important to be ignored. Henry's gaze flicked to the new figure, and for the briefest moment, Eleanor saw something, fear, in his eyes. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to make her stomach twist with suspicion.
Who was this man?
And why was he suddenly here, standing between her and the truth? The man held the folder out toward her, his voice calm but insistent. "This is what you've been looking for, Eleanor. The truth." Her hand trembled as she reached for it, every fiber of her being screaming at her to be cautious, to not trust anything that was handed to her in this moment. But there was no turning back. She tore open the folder and began scanning the documents inside. Her eyes widened as she read the first few lines. It was her name, her family's name, and then a list of connections she had never expected. People she had known. People she had trusted. And then the word that made her blood run cold. Compromised. The man's voice cut through the shock she felt, his tone almost pitying. "You've been lied to, Eleanor. Everything you thought you knew was a lie. The people you trusted, your brother, your best friend, even Henry, were never on your side. They've been working with us from the beginning." Eleanor's had spun, the walls closing in on her as her mind scrambled to make sense of it all.
No.
This is impossible. The betrayal was too much. Too real. Henry's voice broke through her shock. "You're too late. You should have stayed out of this, Eleanor. Now, you're just another casualty of the game." The man in the suit stepped closer, his cold eyes never leaving Eleanor's.
"There's no way out now."
"You've seen too much. It's too late for you." But as his words sank in, something inside Eleanor snapped. The cold, numbing fear that had consumed her for so long gave way to something else, something darker, more determined. She wasn't going to let this be her end. Not after everything she had fought for. Not after the truth had come so close. Without thinking, she lunged forward, knocking the folder from the man's hands. She could hear Henry's voice calling her name, but it was too late. Eleanor had already crossed the line. She was done being a pawn in their game. It was time to take control. The chaos that followed was fast and brutal, but just before the final confrontation, Eleanor saw something that sent a chill down her spine. As the man reached for his phone, she saw the name on the screen, Amanda. And in that moment, the truth became undeniable. The person who had betrayed her the most, the one she had trusted completely, was the one who had set this entire nightmare into motion. And that was the last thing Eleanor ever expected to uncover. The days that followed felt like a blur to Eleanor. The weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the feeling of being utterly alone in a world that seemed to turn against her, was slowly starting to lift. But it wasn't an easy thing to shake off. The truth she had uncovered about Amanda, about the conspiracy that had trapped her in its web for so long, it had left a scar deep in her heart. Amanda had been the one person she thought she could trust more than anyone. But now, that trust was shattered beyond repair, and Eleanor was left to pick up the pieces of her life, pieces that were no longer whole. It was hard to look at the world the same way after everything she had learned, especially when the people she had loved had shown themselves to be something darker. But in the quiet moments, as the days turned into weeks, Eleanor began to realize something. The anger and betrayal still gnawed at her, but she couldn't let it define her. She couldn't let the people who had used her, manipulated her, and broken her dictate who she was becoming. The closure she had been seeking hadn't come in the way she expected. There was no dramatic confrontation with Amanda. There was no final showdown to make everything right. Amanda had vanished without a trace, disappearing into the shadows where she had always been comfortable. It seemed like everyone who had been part of the web of lies had scattered, each of them slipping into their own world, leaving Eleanor to piece together the remains of her shattered existence. But Eleanor was determined to keep going, determined to find peace in her own way. She didn't know what her next move would be, or where the road ahead would lead, but she knew that she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let it all end in despair. In the end, Eleanor did find a measure of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace she had imagined, the kind that came with knowing all the answers and having everything neatly wrapped up in a bow. No, this peace was different. It was the kind of peace that came from within, a peace that could only be achieved by accepting the things that couldn't be changed. The people who had betrayed her were gone, and there was nothing she could do to bring them back. The truth, as painful as it had been, was out there, and it had set her free in a way that nothing else could. But she knew that freedom didn't come without a price. There was no going back to the life she had before. The world she once knew had been irrevocably altered, and she was no longer the same person she had been before everything happened. But Eleanor had grown stronger, more resilient. She had learned to trust herself, and that was something that no one could take away from her. And as she moved forward, she carried the lessons of her past with her, lessons that would guide her in the future. She knew that there would always be questions left unanswered, mysteries that would linger just beyond her reach, but she had learned to live with those unanswered questions. Because sometimes the truth wasn't the thing that mattered the most, it was the journey to uncover it. And the people who had once been a part of her life, who had caused her so much pain, they had become nothing more than a distant memory, a shadow of what had been. What truly mattered now was what came next. But as Eleanor sat on the bench outside the quiet cafe, sipping her coffee and staring out at the world, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something that hadn't quite been resolved, something that was still unfinished. The phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a brief moment, her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before pulling it out, her finger hovering over the screen as the number flashed in front of her. It was unknown, a number she didn't recognize. And for a fleeting moment, she wondered if it was Amanda, or someone else from her past, reaching out to tie up the last loose end. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Not this time. Instead, Eleanor took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon as the sun began to set. The mystery was over, for now. But she knew, deep down, that the world was full of secrets still waiting to be uncovered. And maybe, just maybe, she would be the one to uncover them. She had learned too much, seen too much, to simply walk away. The past had shaped her, but the future was hers to decide. And with that thought, Eleanor stood up, turning toward the road ahead, where everything, good, bad, and uncertain, was waiting for her. The story wasn't finished. It had only just begun. As the screen went dark, viewers were left with a single question. Was the story truly over, or was it only the beginning of a new chapter? One thing was for certain. The mystery that had consumed Eleanor's life was far from finished.